Hi everyone, and welcome to the Landscapes of Art and Earth. I'm your host, Shivani Gupta, and in this show, we will be having conversations with artists and environmentalists who can inform and connect us to the most important topics in our world today. Our guest for today's episode is climate justice scholar and advocate Samira Siddique. Samira's work sits at the intersection of climate justice, spirituality, and global policy. She is currently the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Center for Earth Ethics, where she works to reframe the climate crisis not just as an environmental issue, but as a moral and ethical one, elevating people's relationship with the planet to one focused on the holistic well-being of the people and planet. She's also an adjunct faculty member at Columbia University's Climate School, where she co-teaches the theory, practice, and policy of climate justice. She has served as a visiting researcher at the International Center for Climate Change and Development in Dhaka, Bangladesh, and has also held fellowships at the Climate Museum, the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, and the New School's Zolberg Institute on Migration and Mobility. Raised in New York City, Samira brings both personal and global perspective to her work, where she bridges research, policy, ethics, and lived experience in the fight for climate justice. I'm incredibly honored and excited to have her as our guest on our show today. Welcome to the podcast, Samira.
Thanks so much, Shivani. That's very kind of you to have me on, and I'm so looking forward to the conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much for coming on. So I'd love to start from the very beginning. When did your passion for the environment become apparent?
Yeah, that's a good question. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, which is a very urban environment. And when I was really little, I've always felt very connected to nature and just the natural environment. I grew up in a neighborhood called Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, which is right alongside the Hudson River and where it meets the Atlantic Ocean in the Verrazano Bay. And so I've always just been very connected to bodies of water, the ocean, rivers, and all of that. And that was really my first very primal connection to nature, I guess, was just growing up by the water in that way. And also I was just very fortunate to have the chance, starting from when I was really young, to go back to Bangladesh, which is where my family is from, pretty frequently since I was a kid. And my parents are from this really beautiful town called Kushtia, which is on the western side of Bangladesh. So we'd fly into Dhaka, which is the capital city, very heavily urbanized and urbanizing, vastly quickly growing place, and we drive for like 5 hours into the countryside with beautiful mustard flower fields, like bright yellow with like wide range of rice paddy fields and big sky. And that was really my first interaction with like proper countryside kind of nature, not just the urban environment I grew up in. So having that kind of dichotomy of like nature in an urban space in New York City, and then also my homeland, or my ancestral homeland, and having that connection to nature there as well. So it's always a really big part of my life, and I always had a very strong sense of justice in general, like social justice as well growing up. That also has to do a lot with my family's, the way that I was brought up in different ways. So I also felt very protective of nature. And like the first job I ever wanted was to be an environmental lawyer when I was like 5 years old. So I would say that's how it all kind of started. Like it didn't really feel like it ever really, there was like a real start. It was just always felt like a very natural part of my connection to the earth and other people, and other living things. So hopefully that answers your
Absolutely. That's beautiful. And I feel like the best work and the most passionate work comes from what we connect with most personally and what we have our personal experiences growing up with. So I'd love to ask kind of a follow-up question. What drew you to your current work at the intersection of climate justice, spirituality, and global policy?
Yeah, so another very good question. I've been very fortunate to be able to work on climate issues since I was relatively young. It was always something that I felt very passionate about. It was just environmental justice and climate justice. And I think growing up, seeing how rapidly my parents' home in Bangladesh and my family, my connection to my family, and going back to Bangladesh so frequently and having such a deep connection there, and seeing how rapidly the environment was changing there and how that development was affecting people's lives in very stark ways, was something that I was thinking about very early, was like, okay, this is very deeply impacting people that I am connected to. It has deeply impacted my family's history in the form of conflict and displacement that they have had to deal with for generations in various ways. And having those stories passed on to me and then seeing it with my own eyes as I was growing up, it was always something that I really thought about that was very connected to just social change for me. And so climate, environment, and social impact were always just very deeply intertwined for me. And so in high school, I started, whenever we would go back to Bangladesh, I started volunteering in health clinics there, understood more that way the intersections of public health and urban development and urbanization in that part of the world. And of course, I was also very much on a very driven academic track, just in school. But for me, it was always about like, okay, what can I really do in communities, even as a young person, in the ways that I can. And then I got into climate research in college, and that was really when climate change adaptation was becoming more of a big topic within the kind of mainstream climate space, where at least in the West, where I was based, it was very much a conversation around climate mitigation, like how can we lower our greenhouse gas emissions to stop the runaway effects of climate. But then in places like Bangladesh, they had been already on the front lines of climate change, rising sea levels, changing agricultural practices, and displacement, things like that, already for decades. And so having the chance to be based at one of the leading climate change research centers, really in the so-called Global South, which is based in Bangladesh. It was called the International Center of Climate Change and Development. And having the mentorship and learning there really changed a lot of my own understanding as well of how people in that part of the world are thinking and practicing the work of climate change. And yeah, just doing a lot of the academic research and policy research work for a while. But again, I was always just very committed to what this meant for communities. And then through my work, I just started working a bit more with refugee communities and displaced communities, and was realizing, okay, like we have all the information we actually need about what's happening here around climate change. We have all of this data actually. How do people actually keep living their lives meaningfully? Like how do they rebuild their lives within their own sphere, but also relationally and within their communities? And so for me, this kind of spiritual piece became very important actually, and going through my own personal struggles with my own path due to various health issues and issues in the academic environments I was in. I had significant trouble just making sense of the spaces that I was in, and I wasn't getting the support that I needed to do the work that I was doing either. And so the spiritual piece for me became very important on a personal level, just for my own resilience and understanding of like why I was even doing this work in the first place, like what actually brings me back to doing climate justice work at the end of the day. And it really goes back to your first question of like what connects me to the environment. It's like this deep sense of rootedness that I feel in the natural world and what it means for our connection to ourselves and other people. And that ultimately is a spiritual sensibility that I think anyone can tap into. So that's a bit of my evolution. There's a lot more, detail there, but that's the general arc. And it's still in process, and there isn't any perfect boundary to any of it. Like, it's not like it all just stays in my workplace or it all is like in my personal practices. It all kind of is like a way of being that I've been trying to cultivate for a while.
That's incredible. I've been listening to this podcast. Have you heard of the publication Atmos?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I've been listening to The Nature of with Willow Defabaugh and just been in awe of, I'm forgetting the name of the latest guest on the episode, but she speaks about our relationship with forests and trees and how trees have been, just as an example, trees, ever since humans came on Earth, trees have been there. And so we need trees and trees need us, and building a reciprocal relationship. And I've been learning about this term reciprocal, whether it's in Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer or in the podcast that I've been listening to, and how it's so important to see it as a reciprocal relationship with nature rather than one of extraction and that we're separate from nature. And I think that's kind of what I'm hearing from your relationship with nature is it's one where you connect with it and it's a part of you or part of your life.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful idea. Just the importance of reciprocity as a practice and a belief system is inherent to the natural world already and how it works. And there is so much that we as humans within our society and the various systems that we set up for ourselves to maintain order and control among us, there is much that we can learn about how all of these natural systems and living things actually work in incredibly deep and sophisticated ways that have been around since the beginning of the earth. And I think that we as humans can be very prideful in the systems and relationships that we, and communities even, that we set up for ourselves sometimes, that we know how it should be and there need to be all these hierarchies and it's incredibly limiting, I think, sometimes the way that we've set ourselves up. And it limits our own moral imaginations of ways that we can be and live, and can in fact create a lot of harm around us when we don't think about the reciprocal nature of things, whether that is between us and the tree in front of our home, or just in relationship to other people in the workplace or in our families. Reciprocity is a really powerful thing.
So I'd also love to dive into your work with Columbia's Climate School as well and teaching. what kind of topics do you teach your students, and what kind of work do you do with your students?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I had the opportunity to co-teach a class called Climate Justice Theory, Practice, and Policy in the fall. And it is for the master's students at the Columbia Climate School, basically a review of various issue areas around climate justice, so climate justice and cities, climate justice and food systems. But really the crux of the course is to give students the ability to think through the origins of climate justice as a field, and then also feel empowered to practice it in whatever they go on to do in their jobs or lives afterward. And the thing about climate justice is that it's still relatively new as an academic field. Certainly people have been working on it for a while in various ways, like practitioners and policymakers, but in terms of defining it as a field, it's still quite emergent and broad. There are many different ways to look at it through different disciplines, whether in the social sciences or the physical sciences. And so that, in figuring out how to teach it and construct a course around it, there's a lot of openness there, but it can also be tricky. It goes back to broader questions around like what should be taught in an interdisciplinary climate program in general. And that's maybe a bigger conversation for this podcast interview. But just to get back to your question, is for me, in my own relationship to doing climate justice work, I always try to stay rooted again in what brings me to the work, so that there's a level of integrity that I can bring then to the spaces that I'm in communicating that work, and working with other, whether that's local community or policymakers or whatever. I want to just stay consistent with who I am in that space, and not speak for other people or other ideas, if that makes sense. I think in a space like climate justice, because it's so fluid, and for me is very much about the fluidity of human nature relationships and the possibility and the harm that can come from that, which is such a complex issue. It always comes back to what is my place here and what can I do about it? As a very simple way of answering your question, I guess, and that idea is what I try to base all of my teaching on. And so any kind of exercise of reflection that I can provide the space for students to understand that relationship for themselves, I think, is all I try to do. I mean, there's all kinds of readings that you can do about it. There's amazing work being done in the field, and it's changing all of the time because it's so quickly growing and there are so many different needs to meet there, from the technological solutions, obviously, but also the policy needs and just the basic equity concerns and harms of our everyday lives. There's no limitation to how you can talk about climate issues, really. There's no, I wouldn't say there's a clear right way to do it, but yeah, at the root of what I think there is to share about it is just what brings me here in the first place.
That makes a lot of sense. And I took an art history class in college, and when I was speaking with my professor at the time, one suggestion she gave me is the best work will come about from, you have to ask yourself, what is your personal story? Um, where are you most passionate about? Where have you had struggles in your life? And what story is it that you want to tell? And I think that very much relates to your work, or possibly like your teaching as well, in the sense of we all have a relationship with some kind of connection to the planet, just discovering what is that and how can we bring that out, and we can most connect with it from what we personally are passionate about.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, that's such a powerful thing to do for anyone. And there's like a total lack of, I don't know, anyone can do it, you know, and everyone should do it. I think the world would be a much better, more peaceful place if everyone did that sort of exercise for themselves of like, okay, why am I even doing what I'm doing? And why, like, you know, it's so simple and yet maybe the hardest thing to do. And just creates a lot of issues around power and domination in relationships and with our environment when people don't think about that kind of thing.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I'd love to also ask about your work in Bangladesh. How has your work in Bangladesh and beyond influenced your perspective, work, and mission in climate justice? Kind of continuing from what you very kindly brought up earlier.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think about it a lot throughout my life. You know, my relationship with being a Bangladeshi American person, like New Yorker, going there a lot, having lived there for different periods of my life, and spending different phases of my life there as well. It's all been a process of understanding my own identity, you know. I mean, everyone goes through that, obviously. And for me, it was like I really felt a strong pull since I was very young to just do something to give back, I guess. And that was always very important for my family as well. Yeah, you know, there's like a whole thing. This is not the most eloquent answer, but yeah, I was always raised with this idea of like service and giving back to community. And while I'm very much a New Yorker and have very strong communities, very large Bangladeshi community in New York City, very much like involved and grew up with that. I also felt like very connected to Bangladesh, right? And so these are my communities in different ways. And because climate was such a big issue, like in the climate world, Bangladesh is one of the main points, geographies of research. And so being both within the climate academic world and also having this background of being a Bangladeshi American person, I felt very pulled to do that work there. Now, it's very complicated because on the one hand, it's simple, like there is this tie that I have there. On the other hand, there are all kinds of, expectations of how I should be or act or engage based on my Americanness or like my appearance as a woman or a Bangladeshi appearing woman there. Within an academic space, there are expectations of questions you should ask, the kinds of research and work you should be doing. So there's all kinds of things to navigate. that I was really figuring out for a long time, and it is still a process, right? It's like always figuring out like how to be and what's authentic to me, and also what is the space in which I'm working in. So I don't quite remember what your question was, but I guess like, yeah, the connection to Bangladesh and climate justice work. Yeah, I guess I see myself as like always having this kind of insider outsider kind of mentality. I don't mean this as like a bad thing. Like, I think that's just the nature of where I sit and like who I am and how I've just always oriented myself to spaces, whether I've accepted that for myself or not. But yeah, like doing climate justice work, the issues of climate justice are very different for like a grassroots activist farmer in Bangladesh versus even a researcher at a think tank in Bangladesh. But then at a high-level university in the US, they might not even think about those differences that exist among people there. And so for me, translating work that I do there to here can be difficult. But I'm still figuring that out. As the active translation within even academic work and such interdisciplinary work is very difficult. And so really what motivates me are my own experiences and ethnographic work, because it's hard for me to separate myself and what I experience from, like, to have any kind of objective standpoint, I feel is like a lie on certain issues when you have human lives involved. It is very complex. And so if I am dealing with someone else's life and someone's community, if I'm also ignoring my own humanity and what I bring into that interaction, it's just not, it doesn't feel like a humane interaction. So that's also what my work in climate and Bangladesh has brought me, is like those kinds of like deeper maybe issues around how to relate to other people and within spaces that are limited in how you can see other people. And I found that the work that I do doesn't always neatly fit into those kinds of confines.
I think the work you're doing is so, you're carving a new path, and you're trailblazing, and I think that you're in such a unique position and background in the sense that you bring this such a human perspective and ability to connect with people, and you bring that to academic spaces, and I think the work you're doing is so important and really charting a path for people like myself who are interested in your work and so passionate about your work, and so many people around the world to follow the path that you're creating. Thank you for the work that you're doing.
That's very sweet. Yeah, that's very sweet. I'll say, yeah, it's like, I also say that it's very important for me to have expanded my life beyond academia, because it was a very difficult environment for me to give all of myself to. And so I feel very fortunate to have, I'm still in the process of building. I'm still quite young, and yeah, I feel very fortunate to be in a place where I've been able to see really the potential and amazing opportunities that exist in the world these days, because climate and environmental work, and also so many young people are just so creative, and seeing how much need there is to grow these fields in all kinds of ways and just create new ways of thinking about problems, and therefore creating new jobs and like new, just like new ways of practice. And like, I guess for me, it's very inspiring as well just to work, like just to wear different hats and make sure that I'm, expressing these things in all kinds of ways and not just in one way or one space, because I think that's when it can feel very stifling, and not actually be about like the work itself of like climate justice, and more so about just like, uh, growing the work of like the environment that you're in, if that makes sense. Yeah, rather than like the content or the impact.
That makes sense. Like a more organic way rather than like, um, I'm doing this and I'm gonna do it. It's more like, I don't know if that was a good way of putting it, but it's more like it's a, as you said, like holistic. It's interconnected and it's more, it flows. It's more organic.
Yeah, I mean, like for a long time, I just found myself and pursued this very rigorous academic path. And it wasn't until I was kicked off of it, I just had to totally rethink my life, in ways that I just hadn't had to do before. And really had to dig deep about, again, like what brings me to this work. And yeah, and for me it was like, okay, this was never about like this one job. Like that was never it for me, like when I was very little, I liked just being by the water and looking at the seagulls and like sitting in Prospect Park by my favorite tree and like reading a book. Yeah, it's like, I feel like if there's anything I learned from needing to rebuild in that way, from thinking I'd be doing this one thing for really most of my life and working really hard towards it, and then just that being totally stripped away, and not knowing what I was gonna do, like it was like really, a scary time for like existentially and like various other ways, but then also was a time to take advantage of, to really reflect on like, okay, what is the point of all of this? So that's also another thing I would say, maybe for you, Shivani, or like any, like, it's like, that's just kind of the nature of life, is like, you're like on a path, like at school, to like do a thing and then get a job, and then it's just never gonna work out the way that you think. And I was always told this, right, like growing up, and then I really experienced it, and I don't know, and then it's okay, and then you figure it out, and you just have to go deeper within yourself, and it might lead you back to even where you did start from, but just in a deeper way, and that actually is a very beautiful thing.
That's beautiful. And I think that I definitely relate somehow, in the sense of, in this time where the job market is difficult, and um, figuring out my next steps and thinking about, do I have to choose what I want to do for the rest of my life right now? Or do I have to know that right now? I think knowing that I can take it step by step and my path will unfold, I think that's a very reassuring message for myself and so many other people around the world. And so, Samira, I want to make sure I'm mindful of your time, and I want to ask one last question, which is, as a writer yourself, I'd love to ask about kind of what is your creative process and how do you balance your personal writing practice with your full-time work?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I will say that there isn't like an amazing answer that I have besides it's like having a lot of grace and patience for myself. Like I have these great aspirations for myself always since I was young, to do all kinds of things, right? And then it's like, oh, actually, this time in my life, I'm doing this other thing, and that's where I'll put my energy. And then some other things take a back seat. And so with writing, it's like, when am I gonna, publish this thing that I really want to publish in my lifetime by this age, right? It's like having goals like that haven't really worked out for me yet. Like, they have worked out when I'm like in a school environment, right, to like meet certain deadlines, but then that also hasn't worked out always in my life. And so what I try to at least commit to is just a daily practice. I was carving out time in the morning every day to just have my own time to meditate and pray and like write for a little bit. And then if I can do that every day, then I'll feel good, like I've done something for the day. And when I'm doing that enough, I find that certain ideas come out that I want to expand upon, or it's like, I don't know, like a theme or a title or like a few sentences, and then there's some quote unquote like usable stuff for a longer project I might be working on. And so that's how I have been doing it in the, like right now at this time of my life, is just committing to a practice rather than an outcome. Because I've done that and it hasn't worked for me in a very, like, I haven't felt like my best creative self when I feel like I have to do this thing by a certain time. Like, that's just not how it works for me. And I'm sure other people, but I'll just speak for myself. And also just undoing this very analytical part of me that I've honed for a really long time to just do like the research policy work that I've done for a long time and been trained to do, and then getting back to the like creative heart-centered part of me that is like deeply within me and what makes me me, like the essence of who I am. And so connecting back to that part is very important, and doing that through is like things that make me happy or are fun and playful and joyous, just like making space in my life for doing things like that.
I think that's beautiful, and I think that's so important, and I really feel like you've mastered the art of showing up, and whether that's in your professional life, your personal life, and how they intertwine, and your creative process as well, and how all of them come together. And I think that every day you show up for yourself, for the world, for the people you work with, and you're really doing such incredible work in all aspects of your life, and I commend you as a human being. I'm so thankful to have gotten to meet you. And thank you so much for your time, Samira. This was a wonderful conversation, incredibly enlightening, and I'm so excited to continue to follow your work. And thank you.
Thanks so much, Shivani. This was such a pleasure and just a wonderful opportunity to reflect on all these things. And I really appreciate you, and think you're a wonderful person and have a lot of wonderful things ahead of you as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Well, thank you so much, Samira, and thank you everyone for listening to our conversation. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to reach my email at shivanigupta416 at gmail.com. And that's all for now. We'll see you next time on the Landscapes of Art and Earth.